Okay. So I'm going to
Okay.
start your third session,
Yes.
Juazel. Um, and it
Oh,
looks like
thank you.
I think we've got one or two people who are here for the first time. Um,
Mm.
and so just a quick intro. I'm Laura from Arthritis Kids. Kath from Arthritis Kids is also in the room. There we go. And then Juazel, who has done two iChats for us previously, is doing the iChat
Mm.
session 3 tonight. She is a psychologist and she's also a mom to two JIA kids. And so that kind of really positions her perfectly for us to get help from her. And the last two sessions have been packed full of um, amazing information and tips and tricks and things that I would have loved to have known at the beginning of my journey with JIA and my child's journey with JIA. I found what you've shared with us previously incredibly useful, and we've had some great feedback from you, from everyone else, Yozel. So thanks very much, and I'm really looking forward to
I'm so
seeing
glad.
what you're going to share with us tonight.
Mm.
What format would you like to use? Are you going to talk? Is there time for questions at the end?
So that's the plan. So the plan is that I talk. So tonight is the least, I want to say, content rich out of the two
Okay.
sessions.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to allow more, or try, as I say, allow more time for questions at the end.
Okay.
I find it works a little bit easier sometimes if I go through the content. Why? If the people are more than welcome to ask questions or comments as I go, though. So don't feel like you have to hold it for the end or
Okay.
not. Make contributions. I'm very, I want to say, casual in that sense. But sometimes some of the questions that people ask is anticipated coming up.
Okay.
So if there are things, then might just say I'm going to chat on this, then it's going to make more sense, or
Okay.
I can connect those two. But people are more than welcome to ask at any time as well.
Okay, great. And then can I ask
Yeah.
everyone to please put their cameras on if you can? It just makes it so much easier for whoever's presenting to talk to actual human faces. And also, we're quite a small community, so it's just nice to see each other and be together in the room.
Mm.
If you can't, obviously, we
Hi,
understand.
everyone.
If you can't, we understand. It's
Yeah.
bedtime and all those things. So no pressure. But if you can, that would be great. Thanks so much.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you for the welcome and for creating the space, and Lara, for all
Thank
the
you.
behind the scenes work and effort that you put in making these iChats available and supporting me and organizing and rallying me to get everything on path. So I also want to say thank you for that, Lara, does so much. So for those who are, wary of putting on their cameras or a little bit unsure, I'll never forget my very first, I don't know if it was Karen Share or iChat, like I don't know what the format or the name of it was, but the very first one, my husband and I attended. It was like 2 weeks after Phoebe, our oldest, both of our daughters are diagnosed, and our eldest had been diagnosed. We had like just started medication, and we were struggling to get her to bed. Jocelyn, my youngest, was still a baby, was struggling to get her to bed. We were in like dark. We were both logged in two different rooms between the two of us, trying to listen and make sure we don't go on. And then like towards the end, Phoebe started vomiting, so I'm in the bathroom with Phoebe vomiting, Jocelyn's screaming in the bedroom, and Tinus is on the iChat going, "Can someone help us? What is this? What do we do? What is the like?" It was quite a so I when you every time I hear the turn on the cameras, I imagine that picture in my head, and I'm like, we totally get it when you don't turn on your cameras. This is one space where people get it, but it's also so nice to talk to people and not computer screens as well. And I think especially I do a lot of trainings in different contexts as well. So in a lot of those, it's quite big groups. So I miss the small personal interaction part. And I think that's also sometimes where it's really nice to have that. So thank you. And tonight is very much about that community and social and all of this. It's really linking on the topic as well. So for those who haven't had a chance to watch the other sessions, they are available to go back to. Um, so tonight we you don't have to have attended them to understand tonight. But it's just building on where we already were. So don't worry if you haven't watched them or feel like you can't attend or it's not going to make sense. So, as mentioned, I'm a psychologist, and I really, one of the things I'm passionate about is giving people tools. So, I often, in my trainings, presentations, sharing spaces, I put additional information in, knowing that I'm not necessarily going to get to all of it, and also knowing that it's not going to be for everyone. So, some of the stuff I include is a bit more technical, and it's really not important to know. It's more just helpful to know that it exists. And I also say to people, it gives you a starting point of what to Google. Because sometimes it's like, I need resources, but what do I even type in or search? Or so it gives you things as a kind of jumping off point if it is something that you are needing more information on. I will also make all of these slides available. Um, After somewhere in the next week or so, I'll do my final editing of it so that it is available for people to go through in their own time as well and to have as a resource. And I mean, Laura and Kath and I can still discuss what's going to be what ways we can make it more accessible to more people as well. But for all of you attending tonight, you will also get the slides. So also don't worry if you don't, I know sometimes people, are, if you, I concentrate by making notes, so you're more than welcome to, but I will also make it available afterwards. Okay, so jumping in, systems. We all are surrounded by systems. And the systems are essentially like layers of support or layers of influence. And there's also challenges in that. And this is where the little bit of the technical stuff comes in. And as I say, you don't need to know all the different terms or definitions. I just included it more for us to realize just how many different levels of systems are constantly interacting around us and around our kids. And this is sometimes part of what a lot of the things that I see that we all have a lot of difficulty with is, of course, there's the primary of the diagnosis. But the diagnosis, the individual, and the family doesn't exist within a vacuum. So the child does exist within a family, and the family exists within a bigger family, and within a school, and within a medical, and within a community. And so there's all of these things happening, and these are the systems. And that can be something that can either really be helpful or can be really an added difficulty to navigate. And different seasons, they become different things. So the individual system is the person themselves. So you or your child, your internal life, feelings, your bodily aspect, health choices, that's the individual. The microsystem is the close people that's within your day-to-day contact. The mesosystem is how the different aspects of connect. So how a teacher and the relationship between the teacher and the parent. The exo is the bigger aspect. So it's like the government or your culture or your environment. And we all have different cultures, whether it's a language, a racial area, a geographic area, religious. We have other exosystems and cultures that are also influencing us and impacting on us. And then your macro would be more your country and societal. And there's some societal beliefs that we hold that we don't even realize are there. And it really makes it difficult. And when there is invisible illnesses, like with arthritis, some of those societal values and beliefs is also such a big contributor. So things like a belief, a societal value or belief that might be an impact is things like my child should go to school to succeed. If so, when I don't get them to go to school, then I've failed or they've failed, or there's kind of standards that we feel we need to be complying with. And yes, there are aspects where academics and things can be important, but sometimes there's pressures we put on not because of the actual core thing, but because of that I almost want to say unconscious belief or value of society or fear that could be driving us. And it's also something within our broader culture that we all will face or have difficulty with or encounter. There's a lot of beliefs around medical conditions within different systems, around disability, around ability, around illness, around recovery, around there's so many of these values and beliefs that can also impact on us to quite a big extent and how we cope and also of course for our kids. So how they cope and what people believe about them and what they things like so many of our kids will much rather pretend to be okay so that they don't miss out than what they will pretend to not be okay to avoid something. But still, the kind of default societal feeling is kids will say anything to get out of doing stuff. And that can then often impact how we are able to advocate or how other people are willing to accept our child's difficulties or our responses to their difficulties. And I mean, I can take another example from our life where when our both of our girls, so both of our girls started to show symptoms around the age of 2. Terrible twos is not easy, and then add a pain condition in. Um, so as well, we're very, very fortunate with the medical doctor that we've walked the road with, where initially it was a little bit, we were not sure of what the diagnosis was, but she's always been really supportive of us as parents and very positive around like parental intuition, and the same with our pediatrician. So in our context, the difficulty was actually that like the doctors believed us, but we couldn't physically see the symptoms. So that was what made diagnosis difficult for us, is that they believed that I was saying, this is not a normal 2-year-old tantrum. But what would happen is both of our kids, as we went through this, they're about 2.5, they're having tantrums, and I know it's because they're not feeling well. So I respond with trying to comfort or help them. Whereas a societal belief could be that, oh, now I'm just teaching them that they must use this as an excuse or like because I need to discipline them. And that could have been a big aspect for us. I definitely had times where I got it wrong. Like I will often share, like one of my big regrets is without fail, every single time Phoebe had a timeout, the next day she had a flare. And every time I was like, no, this child's pushing me to the point where she needs to have a timeout. She needs to learn. She cannot get out of this. There has to be consequences. And I don't even like timeouts. I don't really, yeah, there's a lot of, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I would like get to that point because I was done, like claw finished. And every day without fail, the next day, she had like a croup and a flare. So it was not, so I'm not saying I got it right, but it is a societal belief that, again, there's aspects like this. Knowing about it is the first step in being able to not respond to it or be impacted by it, because it can often add to the pressures we put on ourselves as parents and the pressures we put on our kids. It can also add in how we communicate with our doctors, what our kids are struggling with, or how they are doing, or for our kids to feel that they can share. There's a lot of these beliefs, and that's why I'm spending so much time talking about them. That's where the impact comes in, and that's where the value of knowing this comes in. And then there's also your chrono system. It's another system you're changing over time. And things that happen like pandemics, which, happen so rarely, but we happen to go through that for all of us. And it definitely has added to a lot of people's journeys. So also how things change over time. And one of the things I want to highlight around that in terms of systems and systemic awareness is that often when you're in it, you don't realize the small victories. Um, so because it's these little changes that happen every day. So that's where sometimes it's nice to have it is also important in terms of tracking with medications and side effects and flares and where we are. But it's also helpful sometimes, like my husband and I will often talk to each other about like things are going up and down, like it's going better or worse in terms of symptoms. But as long as we're moving in an upward trajectory, our graph is moving, it's getting better. So the upward is good, not more symptoms, the upward of improvement in our functioning and what we can do as a family and how we're coping and how we feel. As long as we're moving in an upward trajectory, we're okay. But when we see we're going in a downward, then we're concerned. So for a while with Phoebe, we were in an upward. So she was still getting flares, but it was getting better. We went on a combo of methotrexate and plasma, so it was so much better, and there was this drastic change. And then from December last year, there was little niggles. We didn't necessarily want to see it, but when we sat and reflected in March, we realized we were on a downward trajectory. It was going up and down still, but the big picture over time was downwards. And that's where it can be both ways for us to realize, okay, when things are starting to pick up again, and we need to manage the medication. Also knowing for us that there is actually improvement. It's not, because arthritis is often not one of those things where you start treatment and it's like you're cured. It's over time. There's improvement gradually over time. Some people have those drastic changes. For a lot of people, it is gradual improvements over time. So that's why this again is important. this is just don't feel overwhelmed. For me, when I look at it as a psychologist, like I see this and I'm like, oh, that's really overwhelming in terms of information. But it's a really nice visual of everything. But it can be quite overwhelming in terms of too much detail. But it's again just a nice, as I said, a resource as a starting point of how everything fits together and everything impacts on each other. Okay. So I've touched on a lot of what's on this slide already as I was talking about the different systems, but it's just to say JIA is not only physical, it can affect, it is physical in that it originates there, but the impact is in all systems. And all some systems impact on the child and the family. And we need to work on all of those areas. And often the main focus is on the physical treatment, which is fantastic. Sometimes there's an internal system support in terms of emotions and other things. But a lot of the times we need to look at the interlink between all the different systems. And I put the example there of if a school doesn't understand or a medical professional is not communicating clearly, it adds stress to the child, it adds stress to the family. And if everyone's not on the same page, then it makes it really difficult to actually support the overall well-being. Um, and it's such a knock-on effect. So sometimes having those things in place, even if we don't have the physical completely under control, but that lessens the stress, lessens the demand on everyone in the system. Okay. Also, things that we need to be aware of. And this is I a lot of these things I don't have fixes for, but I want to recognize them and see them because I think again, I know this. When I'm in it, I don't realize how incredibly difficult and stressful it actually is. And my personality is very much just like I'm very good under in a crisis situation because I go into coping mode. So it's fantastic in a crisis situation if it's like a 20-minute crisis. But if we're in a 6-week crisis, it's not always healthy because I don't recognize that I'm completely overdoing it and my body ends up crashing, or I start getting really irritable and snappy with everybody, or I start completely withdrawing from my friends and family, or I start when I say dropping the ball with things like usually if one of us are sick or in a flare in our household, you will see I get like I do not reply to WhatsApps for ages because I literally like forget it exists. And it's just so there's other ways that it then catches me. So it's just again, I get very hard on myself then. So this is why I'm sharing this, is that when that happens and I don't keep up with everything the way I would like to, or I feel like, oh, why am I so tired? Or why am I struggling so much? Or why am I not doing everything I should? Or I'm not being a good friend. Like I kind of put all that, it's also my personality. Um, but it is recognizing there's a very big difference between you are not doing a good job versus this is an absolutely impossible situation. It's a really unfair thing and no one would be able to do all of this. And it's just being seen and knowing that. And I mean, like I can I've seen it walking a road with other families as well. Just hearing that you're actually this is not you not coping or not doing well or not doing everything for your child not coping or not doing their best or it's very real challenges. So things like work schedules and the stress of I know for us one of us had to be at home because even though we had extra help, our kids, if they fled, they don't want anyone but their parents, especially when they were really, really little. Like we couldn't even just put the TV on and be like, just watch. And obviously being immobile is not going to be helpful, but that they wanted us, they wanted to be on us, which meant we had to move our work or they were screaming while we were working, which was really traumatic for everyone. Hospital policies, being able to access medication. And I mean, again, Arthritis Kids has done so amazing in that. But it's not always an easy thing that it should be, but it's not always. Getting transport to go to the hospital or how a family can manage the care or access to additional supports like psychological supports. Things within what the society, as I mentioned, the views of chronic illness. Again, it's just recognizing how all of those things interlink with each other and seeing that there's a whole person. It's not just when we are discussing JIA. And I think this is again where the arthritis kids community is really helpful for those, obviously, I think I'm assuming most people are there, but if anyone has access to the recording later and it's not, it's a really good space to find that is to go, it's not just how is the JIA, it is how is the person, because this is the JIA is a diagnosis, but it's not the whole person, and we need to support the whole person, and in their whole life. And as I said, we've been really fortunate with our medical teams in terms of our support that that is often what they look at as well, and they will also say, how is the system doing, and not necessarily in those words, but the questions they ask is not just so for both of our girls, it's not just can I feel inflammation in their joints? It is how are they attending school? Are they doing the extracurriculars? Or how are they doing in terms of their day-to-day life? And we're using that as well to gauge where the inflammation is, not only can I feel something in their joints, which has been a really big, especially because my girls have a very they have a little bit of an atypical presentation in how they flare or the extent of things. So it's been really helpful, but it's also helpful for, again, for us as parents to remember that as well. Okay, so this is what we call the team around the child. What we sometimes talk about TAC approach or team around the child. It basically just means that there's a system of support around the child. You don't need everyone. This is just examples. So just because they're all there doesn't mean you should be having all of those people. It's more just to say we should know that there's communication between the different team members. We should know what everybody's role is, and there should be a team approach. Because it is, and this I share more as a psychologist or what I've seen working with clients. If there's a doctor involved and there's a teacher involved and there's a physical therapist involved and everybody's telling you different things, it's really hard if they're not communicating with each other, or at least letting you communicate between the different parties, because you kind of start to feel like you're supposed to be mediating between them, or they're giving you opposite advice or saying different things. Or so again, team communication. In the second session, I spoke about the toolbox. And part of systems is having social support. And I link it there to toolbox. And I said in that session, I'm going to talk about it here. It's just saying again, another tool in our toolbox is having support. And actually, again, it sounds so obvious, but taking time to say, who are my support people? Who are the people that I can talk to about this? And actually identifying them for yourself, and being open with them. Like, so everyone in my support system knows that when I'm not messaging them is usually when I'm not doing so great. And they've become really good at bugging me when I don't, in a good way, because they realize this actually means I've had friends who literally just rock up at my door and be like, you weren't answering, so I knew you were struggling, so I've bought you like this chicken pie. So it's really helpful to be more honest. I wasn't very good at asking for help. So learning how to ask for help. It's a social support. And for your kids, who are they? Who's your therapist? Who's your doctors? Sometimes we don't have options with our treatment team. Sometimes there are options within our treatment team, and we want to feel safe. Or at least be able to communicate with them what we need from that support. So what kind of, so everyone in our support system knows, I need them to say the word arthritis because of our journey. So like when Jocelyn, my second child, was diagnosed, I think our rheumatologist said arthritis about like 10 times when she gave me the diagnosis, because it took me like a year or 2 years to fully accept that Phoebe had arthritis. And I will still ask, are you sure? Is this really what it is? And here I'm talking about it, and I don't know how many years down the line. So again, being able to talk to our support system. What does the support system do for us? What is the point? Sometimes it is talking about the difficulties directly. Sometimes it is about getting information or asking advice. But sometimes it's also just about being together or doing something that is not related to arthritis and just getting completely out of it, or physical hugs, or writing to each other, or having ways to communicate. And all of these things is also true for our kids to have that. We want to give them this as well. And we want to give them those choices as well, because sometimes they want to talk to us about how hard it is. And sometimes they want us to pretend like it's not there. Even if we see they're struggling, sometimes they need us to just pretend for a bit. So it is about recognizing that as well. And sometimes they need spaces where people don't know, and sometimes they need spaces where people do. So it is, yeah, that's it can look different at different times. It's not a one size fits all. So how do we tell other people? Something that people often ask is how can I tell other people? How can I share with other people? And again, it's personal for you as a person for how you choose to communicate. I would say choose a few safe people that you can talk to though. Don't keep it to yourself. It is really important to talk to some people about it. Um, be aware of what you say, that there's a very good chance that it can get back to your child. So, for example, I ask my my husband, I ask my husband less, so I do ask him, but I forget to. But I always ask my girls before I do a talk like this, or before I talk to someone else who's going through the same journey, or just sharing with friends or with teachers. I talk to them first and I say to them, is it okay if I share some examples? Or I'm going to be, so I told them I'm going to be talking to some other parents who also have kids who have arthritis. Is it okay if I tell them a little bit about what it's like for you or what stuff has helped or whatnot? And they'll always say it's fine. But it is helpful to also get their consent because it is also their journey and what we share and how we share, and be aware of who you're sharing it with, and if it had to get back to them, would you be okay with that? I'm not saying every single, I mean, there's like one or two of my best friends that I would share the really hard stuff with. I know it's not going to necessarily get back to my kids, but if I'm sharing to the teacher, and the teacher tells another child or tells another teacher and my child hears about it, are they going to be okay with it? So it's just important to know that as well. um, what I what I also say a lot of times to families, I say there's three categories. It doesn't mean there isn't more. These are just the ones that I kind of group it in for my own self. This isn't like a theory or a psychological thing. It's how Juazel conceptualizes it for herself. Is there are different people that are, as I say again, both for you yourself, there are different people who do things differently. There's also going to be different seasons for you as a family, and different people within your system that you're going to approach it differently with. So the first way is to advocate and to psychoeducate, which basically just means telling people about it. And some people have bigger platforms on which they do this, and that's something that I believe, they called for. That's a purpose within in their life. And some people, this is not their thing. If that is not one of the things that you're comfortable with, there's really nothing wrong with that. You don't owe it to anyone. And you're not failing your child if you're not doing it. So don't ever feel guilty about that. It really is okay. There are moments and situations where you might need to speak up for your child. For example, if they are like with Jocelyn, they were doing x-rays, um, and they were trying to tape her hands down, and I had to advocate for her there, and that's a no, we're not going to do that to save her from medical trauma. I'm willing to take that on. So there's maybe moments where you might need to because of your role as a parent, but in general, it's not something you need to do. This is also where call on those who are able to, or where this is their strength, or ask on the group what resources there is. So you don't always need to be doing that yourself if it's something that's really difficult for you or not having your capacity. Another way is just maintaining the information for those who need to know, and then giving neutral feedback. Have little scripts, have little one-liners that you feel comfortable that you say to people. So because everyone's going to come with their advice and their opinions. So it's things like, we're working with someone we trust, thank you very much, or we're currently just looking at symptoms, or thank you very much for the information. Again, you don't need to almost defend or explain to anyone else. Um, and then my personal favorite is using humor to explain, and also as a coping thing. So I can be quite sarcastic sometimes, and sometimes if I'm just at that point, I might give like a very sarcastic answer. Um, like if someone says, "Oh well, but she doesn't really look very sick," I might say, "Well, you don't really look like an expert in the field, but here we both are with our opinions." I might not say it as extremely. I'm over exaggerating it for humor purposes here, but I might say something a little bit more subtle in those lines. To have, and it is sometimes, it's just having a humor approach for yourself as well. Like I do here, like in this platform, I would be a lot more sarcastic in some ways in this context, because for some people, it's It's actually just reminding yourself that it is that what the other person is saying is completely informed by their own stuff and their own things. And it's important to what we say is find your tribe, find your people that you feel safe with, find your community, find your support. And those are the only ones you really need to be sharing things you need to be sharing with. The others is it's actually you don't need to be. You can, and absolutely, as I say, some people like me, I'm very much a big mouth person. So I share a lot more and I love it because it's something that I'm passionate about and I enjoy and that comes very naturally for me, but it's not for everyone, and that's okay. Like my husband would not be that person. He will if he needs to, but that's not his. He's more a one-on-one person. So what links to this as well is boundaries. I love the hula hoop analogy. I use it in like everything, everywhere. And when we say hula hoops, we kind of go, oh, this is for the kids. We use this in marriage counseling as well. This is in every aspect a really basic, really helpful, really profound tool to have. Is imagine, and you can do this as a family as well, and it's really helpful. And I do it with my kids, and I've been doing it with Phoebe since she was young, and she would get like really irritated with me. She still sometimes does when I talk about it. Um, so because she's like, "Oh, mom," but it really helps because it teaches you what's yours and what's theirs. And what I mean by that is in an emotional, cognitive sense. So imagine that you're in a bubble or a hula hoop, and I like with little kids, if I'm doing a session or anything, I would actually literally have hula hoops and let them sit in it. Everything that's in my hula hoop is my responsibility. I'm responsible for it. So what I think, what I feel, and what I do, that is my responsibility. Everything in yours is your responsibility. Everything in mine is in my control. Everything in yours is in your control. I cannot control what happens in your hula hoop. I can try and impact it in what I share, but I can't control it. I also cannot be responsible for it. So we have got, as parents, a sense of responsibility for our kids and their hula hoops, but we cannot fully control them. And one of our jobs as parents is to be teaching them what is in theirs, what is in ours. And also, one of the hardest things, and this was something that I'd never thought about until I read, it's a book Kath has recommended as well. When Our Kids Hurt by Rachel something. I will look for it again. But she spoke about it, and I was like, that it was such a hit home for me. Is we talk about when we talk with kids, we must go put our pants on. We're not putting our pants on. Our child is putting our pants on. But again, our pants on. She's putting her own pants on. She's not putting my pants on. We're not putting them on together. We are separate entities. And it's a natural parenting thing, and there's nothing wrong or bad about it. The difficulty is when you have a child with a pain condition, when we talk in we can inadvertently make them feel responsible for our well-being because we say things like, we need to go to the doctor because we're not feeling well. And actually, our child's not feeling well, but then they feel like they are making us not feel well. Because for a child, it's not rational. They don't see the separation. They also see that enjoyment. And they can they might feel like they are making us feel sad or upset because of the arthritis. And they might take on a responsibility or a sense of responsibility for what's happening in our hula hoop because of that. And as I say, it's something that it was for me personally, like I still catch myself doing it all the time. And then I like kind of have to reverse and rephrase it and re-explain it. But it's really about recognizing when are we taking stuff on that is actually in their hula hoop out of our empathy as parents, out of our care, out of our sense of responsibility. The difficulty is when we take some of those things on, we become more overwhelmed and we become less helpful to our kids, actually. It's the most counterintuitive thing. But when we take on this stuff, because it hurts as a parent to see your child struggling and you want to fix it and you want to change it. But when we take their emotion as our own emotion or their pain as our own pain, it makes we're actually adding to the load on the system, to the load on them, rather than separating that and bringing our calm bringing our sense of well-being, being our sense of hope, being our bringing our strength to them. So we want to bring our positives to theirs, not telling them what they're feeling is not valid, not downplaying it, but it's recognizing that we don't actually want to take theirs on board. And as I say, it's like it is. I still struggle with it many years down the line. Um, but this hula hoop thing as well can also help with when people are giving you advice. That's in their hula hoop. Doesn't matter what's in their hula hoop. It's really hard not to take it on board, but actually you have enough going on in yours that you don't need to take on what's in theirs. That's their opinion. They can go on with it. If you have capacity, you can give them information. It's still their choice. You get to decide who speaks things that comes into your thoughts and feelings. You have the door. You control the door. It's a really difficult door to control, but you control the door of what enters into your bubble. It's also helpful in terms of just a side note, in terms of sibling dynamics, if they are fighting with each other, what's happening in each of their circles. So, yeah, but she keeps pushing me. That's irrespective. If you push her back, you still in your circle pushed. So you're still going to take responsibility for what happened in your circle. What is other ways you could deal with it? And it's also things like if a child is flaring, what is happening in their circle. So explaining it to the siblings that this is what's happening in their circle. This is what's happening in their thoughts, in their body, their feelings. So it's separating that. As I say, like it's been a bit too effective with Phoebe because I would be like, you need to just stop bouncing all over the place. It's when she's feeling well, then she literally bounces everywhere. Her personality is she's turns out she's not actually the shy, calm, quiet child that we thought she was. She's everywhere. Like, can you just calm down? She'll like look at me and be like, that's in your bubble. That's not in mine. My bubble is happy. It's like fantastic, but still you need to calm down. So that sometimes it works a little bit too well. That she really she's just like, that's your bubble. Your anger, your voice is in your bubble. That's your stuff. I don't have to be responsible for it, which is a good thing. But it's really helpful to have those discussions as well. Okay. So, what is advocacy? I'm going to touch on this one quickly so that I do get to the questions and answers. See, I talk a lot about stuff and then I go into too much detail. But advocacy is basically speaking up, supporting, taking action in order to either promote a cause, protect rights, or influence decisions that influence an individual or a community. So, at some point, as parents, you will need to be an advocate for your child. And that, as I say, might be an individual or in a community setting. Um, so at some point, you might need to, hopefully, it's going to be very little, but sometimes it might mean advocating within an education setting or advocating within a medical setting. Um, the goal when we're advocating is not to be adversarial or confrontational, which is again really hard. But this is where the hula hoops comes in, is first manage what's in my hula hoop. I don't want to be responding from hurt and anger. I want to be managing my hula hoop as calm first, and then I want to engage. As I said, it's really hard, so easy to say, so difficult to do. But what we're actually aiming for when we advocate is not defending our position or our emotion or giving our emotion to the other person, even if we can rationalize and justify it. It's still about we actually want to aim for understanding and support. That is what we want. So we want to share information so that there can be understanding and support. And that's the goal of advocacy. It's not to be adversarial or confrontational. And it's, as I say, sometimes it's really not easy because it is such an emotionally loaded situation. When there's a need for advocacy, there's usually a lot of emotion around it. But that's if we want to get somewhere, that's what we want to aim for. We might need to in school to advocate for things like the child needing breaks or having a hot water bottle or having snacks. If they have a nausea from medication or, for whatever, or having pain meds. It might be within your family for fluctuating ability or immune compromise. It is a challenge for us personally. It's just reminding people that our kids are immune compromised. So it's like it's so difficult when there's a big family event and we get the message that goes, this person is a little bit sick. It should still be okay, right? And it's always so difficult because a part of me just like I never used to be the person that was worried about illness or sickness. I was like, whatever, we're going to get sick. Kids lick the floor. Who cares? There's going to be germs. I don't care. And I can't be that I want to be. And I have to go. Actually, it is a big deal because we've just spent like a month with both of our kids being sick and flaring as a result. And they literally have had like 3 days where no one has been sick. And I can finally work again. My husband can work and everyone's at school. I don't really want them to get sick and start this all over again. It's not so much fun. And it is actually a big deal. And that's difficult to constantly and to then not be let that emotion into my hula hoop to be like, how can you not actually? Why are you asking me this again? This is like 3 years later. But I understand it's not their day-to-day reality. And they have other things going on in their hula hoop that is not in mine, which is why they're asking the question. So, but it does mean sometimes advocating. It could be in terms of blood tests. When we go for blood tests, I phone and I'm going to say, okay, I have two kids coming. They have JIA. They do this every 3 months. There will be no pinning. There will be a butterfly needle. They have had EMLA. Please don't talk to them. They're perfectly fine if you just ignore them and let them go on their device while you're doing the blood test. Don't try to like chat to them. Just leave them alone and they will be fine. And that's what I do every time we go for blood tests. And both of my kids are like, they excited for blood test days because afterwards they get a sweet and a treat. So they're like, oh, yay, it's blood test days. It's fantastic. But it has taken, like, the very first blood test did not go that way, which is why I now advocate for it to happen that way. But it is, again, looking at that and being aware of your own your trauma, but also trusting your instincts. Okay. My last point, I think, before I'm going to have a few minutes for question and answers, is my a topic I feel so strongly about, and I'm not going to go into, or going to try really hard not to go into, is the mind-body connection. And why I included it is because it is an advocacy point. Um, because what happened with the mind-body connection kind of approach and for those who are not aware is basically it's saying that we're not separate beings. Our mind and our emotions and our physical well-being and our cognitive thoughts, our processes, they're all interlinked with each other, which is wonderful and very, very true because they absolutely are. But what has happened to a degree, and it's something I've been trying to put my finger on, why do I get so irritated when people talk about the mind-body connection? I'm a psychologist. That this should be like, really important to me. But it does really irritate me. And I finally was able to verbalize it, like recently, actually. The problem with it is that what has happened is that instead of saying this, there's a mind-body connection and the two influence each other, people have started to use this to say the mind is causing they've made it what is happening in the body. So they've made it a causation relationship rather than a correlation. And that's the part that bothers me. And that's where I said in the previous session as well, sometimes I feel therapy is not helpful because when we have got that wrong, and we're working on it as if it's causation, we could end up actually doing damage because not only is the therapy not going to be helpful because there's a very real physical thing happening, it's also going to make the person feel they're not trying hard enough and can actually make their mood and anxiety worse. And they can make them really negative about therapy and not want to use it in a way that it can be helpful. And this is why I bring it up within this and within the mind body within the advocacy, because it is something that sometimes needs to be advocated for, that as I say, I feel really strongly about, is that I feel people jump too quickly to things like amplified pain syndrome, where your brain is experiencing or is telling your body that the pain is more extreme. I believe amplified pain syndrome happens. I absolutely do. I believe that a lot of the interventions and treatment can really be helpful. I also believe that sometimes there is very real pain that we are not treating, which is why the body needs to amplify the signal. And if we treat the real pain, it will also help with the amplification thereof. So why the amplification happens is there is pain and we're not treating it. So the body turns up the volume button of the pain. So it's like if there's music playing and it's in the background and I can't hear it, I turn it up so that I can hear it. But the music was there and we're forgetting that part. So we are responding as if there was no pain in the beginning. And sometimes the pain has been treated and the amplification is still there. But my kind of experience and research and things has also been that sometimes it is actually still there, and we need to make sure that we are excluding that and really treating that. And I mean, the recent study, and it's not something you absolutely have to go and look at things, but it's something again I've been saying and talking to people about for a while. And there is a recent study that showed this. And don't worry about all these different images if it's like overwhelming and stuff. It was for me a really, really interesting, really important study. Is that what they've realized recently is JRA can also actually cause inflammation in the brain, not only in the joints. And it's not like, oh, it's going to cause brain damage or brain swelling. It's not what they mean. What it means is that it can actually also influence the neurotransmitters, which is the little messengers that sends messages around the brain. It can influence the neurotransmitters, which can also cause symptoms. And it can cause symptoms that look like depression and anxiety and ADHD. It can worsen if those are already there. It can also cause the actual symptoms because a lot of those conditions, those diagnoses, is caused by an imbalance in neurotransmitters. And the inflammation from the JRA can cause the neurotransmitters to be imbalanced, which means that potentially the JRA treatment could be treating that as well. And it could be a sign that the JRA treatment is not actually where it needs to be. So that could be one takeaway. It can also be that if we're still trying to find the right JRA treatment, we could already start putting supports in place for the neurotransmitters so that that can also help with the overall functioning for the child and for the person. So one of the things that I find so fascinating, and I looked at a couple of studies on this, is that one of the reasons that they think, it's still in very, very early research and theory, so it could be, there's still a lot that they need to look at. But they think one of the reasons why a lot of people with autoimmune conditions have fatigue is because it's actually causing them not to have enough dopamine. And that's the part that they feel fatigue from. And the fatigue is often the symptom that most people have a lot of difficulty with because a lot of the medications doesn't help with it. So if we start treating for dopamine, we could be treating the fatigue. So there's a little bit of it, and as I said, this is like literally only recently become a field of study. So it's still very, very theoretical and new, and a lot of people are still trying to get their head around it. But why I bring it up or mention it is because of that mind body connection, is that no amount of therapy is going to change the fact that there's not enough or significant or sufficient neurotransmitters. It can help with the impact of the lack of neurotransmitters and the living with it, but it's not treating the actual thing, which is why we need to be looking at both sides. So I don't want to say those things don't work because they absolutely do. And as I'm a psychologist, this is what I do daily. So I don't want to go the other extreme and say, oh, we only want to look at the body, but we need to be looking at both. Okay, and that I've included for my slides because it's a question I've seen a couple of times. What are some symptoms of anxiety and some symptoms of depression? Because I know that's a question a lot of people ask. And then I will, as I say, make my slides available. The only thing I want to mention there is that one of the things with children is that the two kind of first symptoms of depression in kids is irritability and lack of sleep and difficulty with sleep, sleeplessness or sleep disturbances. Much more likely than what a low mood would be. So they're much more likely to have anger and irritability than actual low depressed mood. So it's why depression is so often missed in kids, is because everyone's looking for the depressed, sad mood, but they're much more likely to be angry and irritable. And so it's also, again, just something to be aware of or to highlight. And we've got like 5 minutes. I said I was going to have a lot of time for questions, but I did not. But we'll have to try and see if we can do a question and answers time at another time as well. I know we mentioned it a few times, so we can maybe look at that. But we've got 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah, we also started late, unfortunately. So,
Yes.
does anyone have any questions? Farana, you've been here for all three of our sessions with Juazel. Rowena, you've just hopped on to this one. Any questions? Esmeralda, questions? Helen? Yes, Farana.
I've got a question.
Yes.
I find that the biggest challenge with my daughter is understanding the impact the JIA has on her mental space. Um, you know, just understanding, what's in her bubble, in other words, what is she
Mm,
feeling? Because
mm.
the kids can't always explain what they feel. And,
Yes.
and that gets quite tricky, especially because and I liked the analogy about the systems because in each of the systems that they have, they might have different emotions. So, for example,
Mm,
it took us a while to figure out that my daughter was feeling bullied at school because she was absent so
mm,
often and she gets labeled the sick kid.
mm,
So to understand that, to get a more insight into
mm.
what could be the risk factors, in other words, that we need to look out for, because I mean,
Yeah.
we in shock.
You also just, I think I want to say two things on that. And the first thing is, again, some of it, some of the difficulties or challenges is things that is just an impossible situation. And I want to say that with a precursor before I say the next thing, because the things that we sometimes need to be doing are the things that we don't necessarily have capacity for. So ideally, we want to be able to have calm one-on-one time. Often we say parallel play. So what we mean by parallel play is you do something alongside each other where you're not talking or not looking, not you are talking, not looking at each other. So things like these diamond dot art stuff, that's like
Mm,
one of our family favorites at the moment, or building a puzzle, or taking a long drive, or something where you are doing something that doesn't require all of your concentration. So it's kind of more like you're just doing it in passing,
mm,
as I say, something creative or artistic. And then ideally just the two of you together and having time, one-on-one time to do that and talk to create space. So that's the first thing. And that's why I started with some of the stuff is impossible because the ideal is to create time and space to have these discussions. Um, because it's for us as well as people. Sometimes what happens is we don't ourselves realize unless we actually make a point to check in how we are feeling. So she might not even kind of be aware of it until someone stops and asks and thinks about it. So
mm,
that's one of the things is just to create that space to have those talks and those times. And as it's also helpful if you're doing something else and not looking at each other because it takes some of the pressure or demand off from like looking at the person going, how are you feeling? And they're like, I'm fine. And like kids don't really like that
mm,
necessarily. And then the other thing would be, as I mentioned in the second session, the equipping with language. So the more language we can have, the more um, little books or videos or like short informational things or telling little stories or make up little stories of potential scenarios that gives them a vocabulary of what they could be experiencing because it's as you say sometimes they themselves don't have the vocabulary to actually say that's what they're experiencing, so you want to create possible scenarios to see if they can latch onto them or give them words or give them descriptions or things as well. So, and there's a lot of YouTube and free things available, to give little things of different, that we call them social stories or social situations or scenarios, and coping skills within that as well, of what could be happening or what things could be the impact or what is it like and it's again that's the other thing is it's a lot of the stuff takes time and capacity and energy from us as parents which we realistically don't always have, so also be kind to yourself in that. And sometimes it looks like prioritizing looking after yourself, which feels really selfish and counterintuitive, but taking that time out because then you will be able to do all of this stuff again.
mm,
And that's the part, as I say, I don't get right often. But it is, I don't have capacity to do this stuff if I don't look after me. And I can't read where my kids are at if I'm really overdrawn because don't have the capacity to actually tune into their emotions and well-being because I'm just like running on empty and survival mode and not actually tuning into their emotions either. Um, so that would be the other area that I would look at. And it
yeah.
is sometimes it's just horrible things that happen. It's
Mm.
not. a fault of you or your child, or yeah, it's really a really, really difficult situation.
Mm.
What do you think, Farana?
No, I agree. Especially the last bit. I was fortunate enough to attend a caregiver support group at the adolescent center. And it was actually such an eye-opener to realize that we need to look after ourselves first. And we consumed by our own emotions and wanting to protect them and do everything. And then, before you know it, you sort of lose perspective. And that was for me one of the takeaways from that is that sometimes you just need to take a step back and just look at it from a different angle, or go for a walk and then come back and say, okay, now I can focus again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. As you say, finding the small things as well, because
Mm,
that I want to just highlight what you said. They're so, so valuable. And sometimes it's the small things, because
mm,
sometimes we can make it so big and then it feels impossible. Like we
mm,
make it like we have to get out for like 3 hours and relax, or but sometimes it is just taking the 5 minute walk, even, or
mm.
the 20 minute walk can be so important as well.
And just out of interest, what I find is my kids like to talk when we're in the car. So
Mm.
they would jump in the car and say, okay, we'll go with you for a drive. And then,
Yeah,
okay, there's a
that is it.
conversation coming.
What an expensive, yeah. It's like, come on, can we find like a less expensive talk place here? But yes, and sometimes what you can even just drive somewhere and sit and look at a view
Yeah.
and just still
Mm,
be in the car and looking. Just I'm thinking of like the cost was. I'm like, oh, we had to like at one point do the drive thing, and it was also just like,
mm,
I love you so much, but could we have a space that's not costing me like 10 rand a minute? Yeah.
Yeah, a walk is a good free thing to do
So
if they'll walk with
yeah,
you.
mm.
if they can, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think also looking after ourselves first, or making our own kind of self-care a priority is it's good to model for our children, because one day when they're parents and
Yes.
they're our age and they have to deal with whatever difficulties they need to deal with in life, I think we'd want them to have capacity
Mm.
to be able to deal with it, rather than
Mm.
burn out or feel overwhelmed, exhausted, fatigued, whatever, and not be able to. Are there any other questions? Rowena? Esmeralda,
This is
always
the
got
book that I
something insightful to
referenced.
add.
Just this is the book that I was referencing.
Thanks. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
thanks so much,
yeah,
Juazel.
that you posted on the chat as well.
I just asked if it was the
Mm.
Rachel Coakley
Yeah, that is
book.
that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was Kath's
Mm.
um, go-to
Mm.
on lots of occasions, when we've spoken about this stuff.
Mm.
Esmeralda, Helen, any questions, comments, thoughts, reflections, ideas? Was this helpful?
Yeah, incredibly helpful. I'm
Yeah.
going to just jump in and say incredibly helpful. I recently just watched the first one because I missed the first one, so I was watching the recording, and I saw the second one, and now I've seen the third one. But I was watching the first one and this one as well. I've been doing this a long time. I also was diagnosed 15 years ago. Incredibly helpful. I've learned so much. I've taken so much from it. I wish it had been available 15 years ago. I'm really grateful that it's available now. Giselle, just remarkable resources, and thank you so, so much for your time and efforts in this regard. It's invaluable. It really is.
Thank you. I love it. I'm really glad if there's some value. I really do.
Yeah.
So much value.
So on that note, I'm going to close down our iChat with you, Juazel. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, your energy, all the resources that you've given us. And I think that these iChats are, we can we'll upload them to YouTube, but we can just go back to them over and over because they're so incredibly useful. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for coming along and listening in.
Thank you everybody.
Take care. Sorry about the cat in the
And
background.
I'll say goodnight and
yeah, good night and sleep well.
Good night with everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Good
night.
night.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.